Welcome. We are here for part 3 of our series. Today we're going to look a little bit more at the vagus nerve and its role within the autonomic nervous system. But before we begin, we're once again going to start with an exercise to get into our own bodies. So as we're looking at all of these different body-based interventions, it's helpful to try out a couple of them and see how it feels like to you. Today we're going to explore a progressive muscle relaxation. So as always, you might sit in that position with a nice tall spine and your feet on the floor. You could also do this from a standing position if you would like. And then take just your right hand and make a nice tight fist with that muscle. And then go ahead and release. Let your hand become relaxed. Open up your palm. Do that 2 more times. Make a nice tight fist with your right hand. And then release. Notice the difference. 1 more time. Nice tight fist with just your right hand. And then soften and release. And then we're going to explore tightening all the muscles in our right arm. So make that bicep muscle like in the picture that you're seeing. And then release. Notice your entire arm softening. 2 more times, tighten that muscle, all of the muscles in your right arm. And soften. And 1 more time, nice tight fist, engage all of the muscles in your arm. And release. Even let your arm come down. And notice if it feels a little bit different. And then same thing on the left side. Take your left fist, make a nice tight little contraction with all of the muscles in your hand, and then soften and release. 2 more times, nice tight fist, and release. 1 more time, and then release. And now your whole left arm, engage your fist, your bicep, your tricep, all of those muscles, and soften. 2 more times, engage your muscles, release, feel the difference. And 1 last time, soften and release. And then our whole upper body, we're going to tighten up our shoulders, our belly, our back muscles, tighten everything up. Notice what that feels like, and then soften and release. Once again, shoulders, belly, back muscles, soften. 1 more time. And release. Bring your awareness to your lower body, and then tighten your thighs, your knees, your glutes, all of the muscles in your lower body, and release. 2 more times, all of the muscles in your lower body, tighten them, and then notice the softening and release. 1 more time. And release. Pause and take a moment to notice if your body feels a little bit different after that progressive muscle relaxation. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Both things are fine, but we're becoming more aware of how our bodies feel when we explore these different interventions. So why do we use body-based interventions? These are what's called bottom-up approaches to trauma treatment. So this means that we are moving from the bottom of the brainstem and the amygdala that's living kind of in the back part of your right brain. We're moving from that part of the brain up. We're also engaging the whole body and working from body sensations up towards the brain. So this is going to let us work with a different kind of engagement with our nervous system. What we typically do is we work with the cognitive part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. This is where we make decisions and think about things. But what happens when we're working with trauma, long-term stress, anxiety, all of these things, they don't live in this thinking part of your brain. So it's better to work with the part of the brain and the body where these systems actually live. So in general, terror is the nervous system's reaction to trauma. We talked about this a little bit in our last section, that this is where our nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system, takes over and does all the things it needs to do to keep your body alive in this moment, in the short term. This is going to mean your pulse rate going up, your heart rate, your breath rate is getting all the oxygen, adrenaline, cortisol into your bloodstream so that you can be prepared to do what you need to do, whether it's running or fighting, whatever that might be. This is located more in the right hemisphere of the brain and the brainstem. So we have a part of our brain called the amygdala, which is kind of the center for fear. And this is what's going to tell us we need to do something right now. This is more dominant during our autonomic processing. So this is what's going to be triggered when something happens and we feel like we need to do something right now to stay safe. The right side of our brain is also where emotions live. And trauma memories are stored more in the emotion side than the left cognitive side. This means sometimes it's difficult for people to remember the timeline and the order of what's happened in a traumatic event because trauma memories are stored differently. They're stored in the emotional side and the amygdala and the brainstem. So remember, when there's a threat, we're using those survival skills through the back part of our brain. If we were going to use our prefrontal cortex, our thinking part of the brain, it would take more time. And that couple of seconds might be what keeps us alive. So we're using this bottom up part of our brain. When we're looking at our interventions with the bottom up processing, we're not really worried about the cognitive thinking. So when we do traditional talk-based therapy, we're thinking up here, we're making order and sense out of things, we're talking through things so that it is logical and we can make sense out of a situation. That's not what we're going to do with these bottom-up approaches. So you see in this slide, another picture that shows a little bit more about how we remember trauma, less in words, that cognitive part, and more in feelings in the body. So when we're working with the brain and the limbic systems, one of the things that is often important to think about is the way people's brains have developed since childhood. And an excellent study that explores this is the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. So the Center for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente, which is a large insurance-based company, a large pharmaceutical company, they created the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And this is one of the largest investigations of childhood abuse and neglect, as well as other household challenges, and how that's connected to later life health and well-being. The study was completed in 2 waves in 1995 and 1997. And the initial study was looking at how childhood traumatic events may negatively impact adult health, and that's both physical health and emotional health. So a very large number of people were surveyed. 17,000 people were asked about their experiences with issues such as childhood maltreatment, family dysfunction, that might be a family member going to prison or a family member having a mental health diagnosis. And it explored their current mental health status and physical health status and behaviors as adults. What this study found was that the more negative experiences a person had as a child, the worse the long-term physical and mental health was for a person. And sometimes you might think, well, sure, if you have these childhood experiences, maybe you're more likely to engage in risky behaviors, to take substances, things like that. But what the study found that if you took all of those behaviors away, even without that, there's still a much worse effect on the physical and mental health for the people who have experienced childhood experiences that were not positive. And this is not just a little bit different. If you had 1 versus 4 of the different adverse childhood experiences, the amount of impact on your health is going to be vastly different. So we find that is exponentially greater the more you have those adverse childhood experiences. What happens with these traumatic experiences is that the vagus nerve is not working properly when the body is stuck in the sympathetic nervous system. And if as a child you grew up in one of these settings where your vagus nerve was not working correctly and you're always in the sympathetic nervous system for survival, your body and brain did not get to develop in a way that will be good for long-term physical and mental health. So what is the vagus nerve? The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. There's 2 branches, and we're going to see in a moment how important those 2 branches are. Or our dorsal vagus nerve goes more down the back of the body, and that's in charge of the freeze response, the most primitive aspect of having the body. The ventral vagus nerve is in the front of your body, and it is very different. This is the part that controls the social aspects. So this is looking at your facial expressions, your voice tone, things like this. So our ventral vagal nerve is the part that can actually look at a person, look at the expression on their face and say, I think you might be a safe person. I think at this moment you don't mean me any harm. So it's okay to stay in that parasympathetic system and to be in a calm and controlled state around this person. Our vagus nerve moves down through our brainstem, through our tongue, our vocal cords, our heart, lungs, digestive system, and so many other organs. We're going to see a picture of this on the next slide. If we're in a high-term stress or a trauma response, all of these different organs are going to be impacted, and this is where those long-term health issues may take place. If we have a healthy vagus nerve, then our body is better able to return to a balanced state after that stress or trauma. So we want to be able to move into our sympathetic nervous system when something is coming up. But we also need to be able to move back to our parasympathetic nervous system for all of the long-term things that it does. Remember, that is our rest and digest system. That's what keeps us healthy in the long run. You see here in this slide 2 different pictures of the vagus nerve. And these 2 pictures show all of the organs that are connected by the vagus nerve. So we can see that this is most of our major organs is going to our eyes, our heart, our lungs, liver, stomach, intestines, our kidneys, and even our reproductive organs. When we look at all of these organs that are connected to the vagus nerve, it makes sense that this nerve needs to be healthy and work well so that we can get into that rest and digest parasympathetic system so that all of these organs can function properly in the long run. And remember that ACEs study, what it showed is that when that's not taking place, we have all kinds of issues such as long-term heart issues, we have autoimmune system issues, we have really long-term health issues. And the study actually found that the lifespan of the person can be shortened by 20 years. So this is why we really need to have our vagus nerve developed and kept healthy. So a little bit more about polyvagal theory, and this is what the vagus nerve theory by Stephen Porges has been named. We're understanding constriction as a function of the social engagement system. So that's the ventral vagus nerve, and that's the part that, if it's threatened, is going to go more into dissociation or avoidance. Remember, the vagus nerve is responsible for the muscles in the face, and it shows the feeling state of that person or animal. So again, that ventral vagal complex, that part in the front, connects the brain to the heart, throat, and lungs. And it can also initiate that relaxation response. It's controlling the social engagement system that allows us to communicate with other people and to see if they might be a threat. But it also allows us to get into our parasympathetic relaxed mode. Our dorsal vagal system in the back connects to our stomach and lower gut. And this system is connected to more of the freeze response and dissociation. So we're going to see this again in another slide in a picture in just a moment. When we can't release our parasympathetic nervous system's response, that means the energy that was meant to help us survive gets stuck in our body. We're stuck in that mode where we have all of those extra hormones, the adrenaline, the cortisol, our heart rate's up higher, everything's still ready, and we get stuck there, always being ready for the next threat. What we see with animals in the wild is that when the threat is over, they kind of shake and tremble and they get all that extra energy discharged from their body. But as human beings, we have been taught that we're not supposed to have a reaction. So we tend to hold all of this inside, and that's when we get stuck. So our research has found that it takes the connection of both the mind and body working together to get rid of those physical and emotional responses, that physical and emotional pain, so that we can restore our systems to a normal baseline. When we're working with the parasympathetic system, we're calming the body down, we're creating that space where we can heal and have better health in the long term. So that is one of the reasons why we really need to focus on these body-based interventions. They're all connected to the vagus nerve. So you're going to see on this picture here in this slide, another chart of the polyvagal system. And this is where we break it down and it gets a little bit more complicated. So we see at that bottom level, when we're in the healthy parasympathetic state, we're using the ventral part of our vagus nerve. This is when we're calm, we're grounded, we're mindful, we're able to pay attention to what's happening in the present moment without alert. This is our safety zone. We're using social engagement for connection to other people. And this is the zone where our bodies are able to be in the rest and digest part, that long-term positive health, working on digestion, immunity, and all of those things that we need in the long run. When a threat first comes up, we see that we start to move up that curve into the parasympathetic system. This is where our bodies are going into hyperarousal. This is preparing for fighting or running. Our body's getting all of that energy to keep us alive in the short term. The part we don't often talk about is that when our bodies, through the amygdala and brainstem, decide that fighting or running will not keep us safe, we go farther up this curve. And that's when we're getting into the dorsal vagus nerve and into what's called hypoarousal. This is where we often see people dissociating, becoming numb, and shutting down. And this is because our bodies have decided that we might not survive this situation. So we need to actually numb things out so that we cannot feel the pain of the threat or the event taking place. So this is actually a positive thing, is protecting us through dissociation or other means so that we're not feeling the pain of what's taking place. If that threat has passed and we're still alive and well, then we see our bodies going down the other side of that curve. We're going into deactivation, moving back through the sympathetic system and back all the way to the healthy part of the parasympathetic system and the ventral vagus nerve. Again, for animals in the wild, that might be done by shaking or trembling. For us, we might need a little bit of extra assistance. So we might need to incorporate those body-based interventions to help move us down to this lowest state, this calm state. So one more idea that's connected to this moving in between the different systems, is called heart rate variability. So our heart rate variability will show us how well we're able to move between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So we want our bodies to be able to get into the sympathetic nervous system and react to a threat. If you're driving down the road and suddenly a car starts coming towards you, we want our bodies to be able to go into the sympathetic nervous system and take action to keep us safe. But then we also need to know how to calm ourselves back down and move into that parasympathetic nervous system when the threat is gone. So, when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, as we've said before, our heart rate goes up. The trick is that we want to more quickly be able to lower our heart rate and get back into our parasympathetic nervous system. So it sounds a little counterintuitive, but it's actually better to have a higher heart rate variability. That means our bodies know how to move back and forth in between these two systems. So we want to be able to go up, prepare, take care of the threat, and then calm back down. A poor heart rate variability is going to mean that it takes more time to move between those two systems. So you might get stuck in that higher level in the sympathetic nervous system. So we want high heart rate variability. We want to be able to move back and forth in between these two systems fairly quickly. So you might ask, how can we increase our vagal tone? Or how can we move in between these two systems? So you see here that this list of activities is very similar to the list of body-based interventions that we started this series with. We can improve our vagal tone or strengthen our vagus nerve through breath work. You can do any of the breath work techniques you've learned. Perhaps you inhale through your nose, exhale through your lips or your nose with a long exhale. Lots of different breathwork techniques that you can practice to strengthen your vagus nerve. We can use yoga or any intentional mindful exercise, Tai Chi, lots of different things. The key here is that the movement must be done with mindfulness. We're paying attention to what we're doing. So we're not exercising to strengthen our physical body. We're not checking out. We're doing it as we pay attention to what's happening. We can do this through singing or chanting. So remember, our vagus nerve runs through our vocal cords. And when we use our voice in this way, we're vibrating the vocal cords and giving the vocal cords and the vagus nerve a little massage. This actually works a little bit better with singing and chanting than just talking because our range is often larger. We have higher notes, lower notes, more sustained notes for singing and chanting. So that is a wonderful way to also strengthen that vagus nerve. Meditation can be a wonderful way to work with our vagus nerve. This could be guided or silent, lots of different forms of meditation. But there are some cautions for this. We're going to talk about this in the last part of the series because sometimes meditation can also be a little bit triggering. Cold exposure is one thing that people have done to help balance the nervous system. So ice baths are becoming somewhat popular in certain areas of the world right now where you actually get into a bath full of ice for maybe 3 to 5 minutes, not a long-term thing. And that will help kind of shock your nervous system into rebalancing itself. A smaller version of this that comes out of dialectical behavioral therapy is just holding on to an ice cube. So if you notice that you're really activated, grab an ice cube, hold on to that ice cube, and notice the sensation of that coldness in your hand. Massage can be useful. That could be a self-massage or getting a massage from another person, especially working on the tops of the ears and down the sides of our neck. Nutrition is actually important when we're looking at our nerve. So this includes having probiotics, omega-3 fatty acids, things like this into our system. So our gut brain actually impacts our mental state. When our gut brain is healthy, it can send that feedback back to the vagus nerve and help strengthen it. And then lastly, our ventral vagus nerve. Remember, that's the part that is looking at that social engagement. So when we're socializing, we're laughing, we're enjoying time with other people, that also helps improve and strengthen our vagus nerve. So thank you for joining me for this part of our series. We'll see you again for our next part.